I wanted to start off with, actually, I guess it's maybe reflecting on the sort of company culture and that bottom up approach that you took. Um, one of the objections that I often hear just in my work is people will say things like, "Oh, we just want to do like cool things with our AI, and like I'm worried this is going to put like roadblocks in the way." And I think what you'd said about embedding it sort of within the processes that you've already got sort of addresses that a little bit. But I can see that some of the people that have put questions in were sort of asking similar things, I think. So I'll read you two, I think, that are sort of asking similar questions. So here's one. This is from David. He said, is it realistic for small to medium-sized businesses to implement or even consider such frameworks? Won't they have to rely on their service providers, whether that be Google, Microsoft, or is it just noise? With GDPR, you had to tick boxes to say you complied. So any thoughts on that one, Sneha?
Yeah, that's a complex question, actually, but let me break it up. So I would say yes, to kind of go backwards, yes, with GDPR, if there's regulation, it makes it clear what you need to do. I think in the absence of regulation, you then have to navigate that on your own. And yes, it is harder. I would say, though, that ethics is, in my view, and how I've come to understand it, ethics is about the North Star, whereas compliance is about the minimum you need to achieve. So compliance is about ensuring that you at least hit a minimum standard, I guess. Well, it depends on the regulation, but certainly it's what you have to do. And really, an ethical framework is about what you want to do. And so for us, as a small company, just coming back to that small company element, I would argue that there were some things that were made probably much easier by the fact that because we had a CEO that really did care and we had senior leadership that was bought in, there was broad agreement that this is the right thing to do. We didn't know where it was going to lead us. And obviously, obviously there's a balance of interest between how much resource you put into it and how long it takes versus what you get out of it. But I think for us, because we started, I would argue, a little bit early on and ahead of the curve, we had the time to go slowly and build slowly and kind of organically. Obviously, that would be different based on where you might be in your journeys. I hope that captures the three elements.
And I think it leads really nicely to the next question that someone asked, which was, this sounds like an incredibly involved and extended process, which is fantastic. I would be curious to hear the business case for what must have been a considerable investment of time and resources. And if we could get a ballpark of the price tag for all this, that would be very interesting too. In other words, how is the investment justified from a business bottom line point of view?
Okay. So I don't have a number for you. I could probably work it out. It might take more than the back of the envelope, but probably work it out. But I would say, right. So what's the justification, right? And I think right from the very beginning, we asked ourselves that. So there's two justifications for. Well, actually, there's three. So the first one is one, we ourselves wanted to do it. We believed it would be important to our customers. Most of our customers at that time, and certainly a large part of our customers now still, are public services or regulated industries. To them, identifying mitigating risk was really, really important. And obviously, there's lots of different risks associated with doing things fast and doing things without like an ethical consideration to it. We also realized that, so I guess one of the ways in which it made business sense was mitigating against reputational loss. The second way it makes business sense is that it allows us to build trust and extend our relationships with our customers because they trust us to actually do the right thing and actually build conscientiously. The third thing I would say in terms of a business need is, actually, let me think about it some more. I think the third thing that I would say in terms of a business need is that it allows us to respond much quicker as regulations come in, because we have actually invested the time to think these issues through. Whereas so now that regulations are coming through, we've mostly thought about all of these issues at least at a high level, and maybe what we need to further do is just think about how it fits into our own processes. So it makes us much more resilient and prepared, and we're not sort of responding very I guess urgently, and we kind of have that more considered approach. So those would be the three things I would say.
I think really it almost echoes perfectly what one of our senior consultants, Tara, just put in the chat, which is, what's the cost of not doing it? You can flip this on its head and sort of look the other way. If we don't do it, that actually would be a risk. And I think it must be nice for Amy now to be so well positioned. If there is somewhere looking to sort of procure services or products from somewhere, and they're like, "Ooh, this company has already thought about this. If we purchase their services, that's absolutely like a little bit of a guarantee that they're already thinking about these kind of risks."
I think that, well, actually, now that you mentioned that, there's actually two things that have sort of spun out of this effort that are important to our business. So one is, as you mentioned, people, a lot of procurement and tenders, they now ask for this. They want to know, are you aligned with the NIST framework? Are you in agreement with, how can you evidence that the work you're doing is ethical and safe? So we're already positioned to do that. The second thing is, I think, having worked on this for the last 2.5 years, we're also in a position to think about how we might, especially for our product, how we might automate some of this governance. I think that's a really important part. So a lot of data governance, for example, role-based access, things like that, are now integrated into data engineering workflows and capacities. And I think that sort of element is coming into our Insight Engine as well. So a lot of the work we've done has sort of allowed us to see, I guess, opportunities where we can automate some of this governance. And then third thing, in terms of services, because we've integrated that into the project lifecycle agile processes, so where we've got reviews and retros and things like that, it's not any more overhead, but there's a lot more assurance that we are considering these things. And when we first started doing that, there was when we were testing, especially, there was a little bit of pushback, because we thought, a lot of the people thought it would take a little bit more time and it would be too much overhead. But actually, in the end, we refined it so it doesn't do that anymore. And so actually that's been really helpful as well.
It's really interesting. Thank you for that. I want to turn to a few questions that are sort of asking really specific questions about the way that you would implement these frameworks. So the first question, is the use of this framework mandated? And if so, how does that work in practice?
No. Well, we've created it to be used in lots of different ways, and we articulate the ways in which we want people to use it. So, for example, the canvases, we have 3 different ways in which we want people to interact with it. One is if they themselves are doing, let's assume you're a data scientist and you're doing a project and you're coming up with a certain ethical dilemma, and you might then want to see, okay, what does, and you're a practitioner, and Amy, and you want to see, how does this align with our ethical framework? Does this violate any of the principles we are sort of agreed on? And then you may use it like that, almost as reference material. But 2, the canvases also feed into our project lifecycle workshop, and they actually work as prompts. So they allow us to, operate. So we take all the considerations, and actually it forms like this nice big checklist, things that you can think about as, have we done this? Should we be doing this? What do we do if? And then how might we sort of action oriented? So that's another way in which our canvases play into it. So for each of the pieces of collateral we produce, we've also been thinking about, like, how would people actually engage with it? And this is very much part of the change and adoption element of the ethical framework.
Interesting. So I think you've just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case. It says, does the framework cover the full data value chain or just upstream data science projects? E.g., can it be used for data collection?
Yes, it is. So we have a data engineering a data engineering canvas that is sort of focuses on that kind of ETL pipeline, as well as like how data sets are curated and so on. So obviously we have, where we're doing internal projects where we have a lot of control over it, and a lot more ability to influence the outcome. But where we are consulting, what we do is bring these considerations to the table to be discussed. And so at the very least, even if we can't action it or we choose a business need over the ethical principle, at least we're doing so in a very conscious manner, but in a manner that actually allows us to trace it and acknowledge the decisions made on the back of that kind of conflict.
I think that's such a good point, because, you're never going to always make a decision that everybody agrees with. There's always going to be somebody who objects to some ethical decision if it is a difficult decision to make. But at least if you can say why you did it, I actually think, this is my personal opinion, I'd be interested to hear, is I think it goes a long way towards helping by goodwill, essentially, to be like, this is why we did it, even if you don't agree.
Absolutely. And the honest truth is that a lot of times the business need supersedes an ethical consideration. It can do quite easily, but at least where it does, we are acknowledging that there is a conscious trade-off, and also you can then start to think about, okay, well, if I'm going to prioritize the business need, and what mitigations can I put in place that at least somewhat alleviate some of the downstream effects. So part of our toolkit actually allows that to happen as well. So it's not just raising risk, it's also addressing risk and then also tracking it through that project lifecycle.
That's so interesting. Now, this next question takes it back even one more step. Does your ethical framework mean that you don't take on certain types of clients or projects because they would compromise your ability to adhere to your principles? Is that part of the framework, some sort of ethical review of potential projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. And to be honest, it was one of the first questions that we talked about. I'll be honest, there's no easy answer to this one. I think what I would say is that in general, it is possible to do good work and conscientious work in almost every situation and with every client. I would possibly argue that the more sort of uncomfortable we are with the ethics or the context of a client, then the more we feel like our approach should be sort of included. So we're comfortable with the idea that we'll be able to navigate like difficult ethical options. So no, thus far, although we do talk about it, we haven't exercised the framework in that way.
It seems like, you never know when that would happen, but it easily could, couldn't it? I'm going to go to a really specific question now that Kevin asked at the beginning, because what's going to follow on from this question is somebody else has asked for a few examples. So I have a feeling that Kevin's might be one. So he said, "Hi, I'm a DPO and I'm very interested in your example regarding utility firm processing of customer consumption, in particular when customers are at home or not. Specifically, when they're away for more than a few days, they're probably on holiday. It's a prime slot for criminals to break into the property. Any hack of a utility firm therefore creates great risks for the customers. It would take very strong controls to protect the customer. Was this considered, and what were the solutions? Note that this is a when event, not an if event. It will happen in the near future."
Yes, totally agree. Yes, we actually encountered that when we were doing proof of concept projects, we could actually see information like that. We could see lots of trends about people's properties, really, but also, we could infer, I should say, a lot of things about their life from their water consumption and their electricity consumption. So the short answer to that is yes, it's possible, and yes, we have considered it, and we have worked on how we could approach such a project. So in that particular case, for example, what we realized was that we had to go up in granularity and not be at the property level, just for the use cases of that project. We went postcode level. We realized we could still see quite strong like trends in like personal information or inferences possible. And so we went one step up as well. And it was still able to give the business value to the utility company for what they needed. So I guess us raising that as a risk allowed us to exercise some more discretion as to what the appropriate level would be to actually still deliver that value.
Because it's such a delicate balance, isn't it, between delivering the value and mitigating the risk?
Yep, absolutely.
So the next question said, where did it go? Can you give some examples of catches the framework has made? Which I wondered if that was one. And also how you triage use cases, which will get a full review and which will not get a review.
So the catch was something what I just mentioned, but there have been quite a few like that. I guess, sorry, could you repeat the second part of the question?
So the second part was, how do you triage the use cases, which get a full review and which don't get a full review?
Okay, so the way we've approached it is to treat each project as its own kind of deliverable, and we would do a risk assessment for that project on an ongoing basis. So typically what we do is we do a risk assessment at the start that's informed by our kind of ethical principles, using those as prompts, and then we identify like what the whole like risk landscape looks like, and then we agree a set of actions in the back of that if the risk is low. So we do some risk scoring and prioritization, and if the risk is low, we decide, okay, we can live with that risk as long now that we know it exists. We can live with it. It's pretty low risk or low likelihood of happening. And then there's 2 or 3 categories, and so we could also, where the risk is slightly higher or the likelihood is much higher, we can then decide we have to mitigate this, and so on and so on. So we have a tiered approach to what we do about it. And typically, if there are actions on the back of that then becomes assigned to somebody like an owner. So whether that's the product or product manager, or whether it's an individual. So maybe it triggers, a piece of analysis. So, okay, we don't know enough about this. We actually need to find out some more. So that then becomes an action that kind of follows on into the backlog. So it's that kind of tiered approach that we take to it.
Really, really sensible. Thanks for sharing that information. So next question on here was from Scott. I work in sales and I'm curious if these frameworks were included in your outreach or GTM strategy. And if so, what was the uptick in engagement?
I'm not at all that aware about how it operates in sales, actually. That said, we did recently start including these considerations and this framework in many of our sort of, bids and processes, and we've got excellent feedback for it, but I couldn't tell you anything more specific because I just don't work on that side of the business.
You're in the data science team. Really interesting question here. In healthcare organizations, ethics and often comes down to DPOs and Caldecott guardians. However, who should lead on this in other sectors? I really like this question because when we have our data ethics professionals course, we do get a lot of DPOs, and quite often those DPOs are in a position where somebody said to them, like, is this ethical? And they're like, well, I do data protection, but this is about like AI. And so I think DPOs a lot of times are like the front line of ethics, and it isn't necessarily where they were, what they thought they were signing up for. Maybe sort of got this role. So one of the things I'd be curious to hear from you is sort of related to this question, who should lead, and were there any roles in your organization where the person was like, actually ethics doesn't relate to my role at all? Or people who maybe thought they didn't have any relationship with data ethics and it turned out they did. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on sort of like responsibility around these things.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we came to this question slightly later in the process, primarily because we spent the first part of our time developing what our ethics framework should look like and what it should do. Sort of halfway through, we realized that when we started to think about the change and adoption, like how do we actually uptake this as, part of the process, we had to have people that owned it. But I think a byproduct of two things: one, that we were a medium enterprise, and a growing but medium enterprise, but also the fact that we were that we decided to do a bottom-up approach meant that we wanted a collective responsibility. And so what we decided to do is to kind of harness the communities of practice as a means to have these conversations. So for example, our data canvases, the idea is that they will be owned by the community of practice. So the person that leads, so our data science community of practice owns the data science canvas. They're sort of part of their role is to kind of make sure that it's being updated, reviewed, that sort of thing. Or for example, equally for the data engineering and so on. And I guess because we have that role-based approach, it is a distributed sort of responsibility. And I think that's why we also have that tiered approach. So where we have role-based, so individual people, and they own what they do, and they're charged with being responsible for their work. But then at the team level, they are also charged collectively to be responsible for the outcomes. And then at an organizational level, we have some roles and responsibilities for people. But typically we try to distribute it, because if it's any one person, one, there's a single point of failure, it's a resilience issue. And two, there's no collective sense of responsibility. It just means that you could have the decision sort of punted down the road, and it just means that like there's more conversation, there's more kind of desire to resolve issues and dilemmas.
That sounds like, hearing you talk about it that way, it just sounds like Amy has really become a very mature organization in that sense. We do these data ethics maturity assessments as part of the consultancy and learning offerings at the ODI, and hearing that about sort of these distributed responsibilities, that's really what it takes. When you talk about a single point of failure, that's where you don't want that, do you? 'Cause you get those like the real reputational damage and the real harm. So
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think we are just about out of time now. So there might be a couple of questions left. I'm sure, Sneha, you said you would happily follow up with those.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, I'm sure, I'm not overstepping here, Sneha, you said you're happy for people to add you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out.
Share their questions or share their thoughts.
Definitely. Definitely. For anyone that's listening, if you are starting off on this journey and you want opportunity to collaborate, or if you're interested in what you've heard about us as a company, or you want to know more, please do reach out. We'd be really happy to engage with you. Really excited to kind of collaborate and work together.
Thank you so much. I just want to wrap up just to say thanks for coming to today's webinar. I think Joe's about to share a slide that has a QR code if you'd like to sign up. We can't quite see it, Joe. Oh, there it goes. So here's a QR code if you'd like to sign up to get the emails about these continuing webinars. Our next one is scheduled for the 25th of March. It's going to be Hugh Gage, who runs a consultancy on many things, Engage Digital. And he is going to be talking about consent management platforms, or cookie banners, because they are something that, obviously are required by compliance for a lot of things. But how do we balance that need from a business to sort of capture data about customers with the ethics of sort of informed consent? So that's what he's going to be focusing on. I just want to let you know, we have got our next data ethics professional course starting on the 17th of March. So it is in time for this financial year. If you've got some year-end budget that you're wanting to make sure that you use well. So you can sign up on our website. We will have another course starting in early May and a third in September. The dates for those aren't set yet, but the March one is. We also, Sneha mentioned that one of the things that they did to sort of get this organization-wide buy-in was schedule intro to data ethics courses. These are just 3-hour courses that we run for closed groups. So we do have those. If you would like ever to book one of those, you can contact us at training@theodi.org. One last note, we do have, it's not on the slide here, but we have coming up probably our only session this year of strategic data skills, which is a slightly more sort of data analysis, more technical things about data for managers, strategic, not technical really. And we are likely to have an open data in a day course running soon as well. So if you're interested in either of those, both are probably also going to be before the end of the financial year. Feel free to get in touch at training@theodi.org. So thank you so much, Sneha. This was absolutely fascinating. I learned loads. I'm blown away by the sort of quality and like depth of what you've done. So thank you so much for sharing it. I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you very much.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you, ODI. And thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it.